Every time you do something you like, you eat a piece of chocolate, dopamine hit. You look at your Instagram, dopamine hit. You see someone you like, dopamine hit. If you scroll social media and you see something you really like, dopamine hit. But then you get to something else and you go, not that interesting. However, had you arrived at that second thing first, you might think that it was really interesting. How much dopamine you experience from something depends on your baseline level of dopamine when you arrive there and your previous dopamine peaks. This is why when you repeatedly engage in something that you enjoy, your threshold for enjoyment goes up and up and up. Chocolate will increase your baseline level of dopamine 1.5 times. Okay? So it's a pretty substantial increase in dopamine. It's transient. It goes away after a few minutes or even a few seconds. Both the pursuit of sex and the act of sex increases dopamine 2 times. Nicotine, in particular nicotine that is smoked, like cigarettes and so forth, increases dopamine 2.5 times above baseline. Anyone who's ever been a chain smoker or observed a chain smoker understands that the increase in dopamine from nicotine is very short-lived. Cocaine will increase the level of dopamine in the bloodstream 2.5 times above baseline. And amphetamine, another drug that increases dopamine, will increase the amount of dopamine in the bloodstream 10 times above baseline. A tremendous increase in dopamine. Exercise. Now, exercise will have a different impact on the levels of dopamine depending on how much somebody subjectively enjoys that exercise. So if you're somebody who loves running, chances are it's going to increase your levels of dopamine 2 times above your baseline, not unlike sex. People who dislike exercise will achieve less dopamine increase or no increase in dopamine from exercise. And if you like other forms of exercise like yoga or weightlifting or swimming or what have you, again, it's going to vary by your subjective experience of whether or not you enjoy that activity. Caffeine will increase dopamine to some extent, but it is pretty modest compared to the other things that I described. However, caffeine actually makes you able to experience more of dopamine's effects. And it's well known that different compounds like alcohol and nicotine or caffeine and nicotine or certain behaviors and certain drugs can synergize to give bigger dopamine increases. Or let's say you're somebody who kind of likes exercise but forces yourself to do it, but you make it pleasureful by giving yourself your favorite cup of coffee first, or maybe taking a pre-workout drink, or taking an energy drink, or listening to your favorite music, and then you're in the gym and you're listening to your music. That all sounds great, right? Well, it is great, except that by layering together all these things to try and achieve that dopamine release, and by getting a big peak in dopamine, you're actually increasing the number of conditions required to achieve pleasure from that activity again. Sometimes you don't do the dopamine enhancing activities. You don't ingest anything to increase your dopamine. You just do the exercise. You might think, well, that sounds lame. I want to continue to enjoy exercising. But that's exactly the point. If you want to maintain motivation for school, exercise, relationships, or pursuits of any duration and kind, the key thing is to make sure that the peak in dopamine, if it's very high, doesn't occur too often. And if something does occur very often, that you vary how much dopamine you experience with each engagement in that activity. Now, some activities naturally have this intermittent property woven into them, right? We sometimes have classes that we like and other classes we don't like. We don't always get straight A's. Sometimes we don't get rewarded with the outcome that we would like. We don't always have the perfect relationship outcome. But understand that your ability to experience motivation and pleasure for what comes next is dictated by how much motivation and pleasure and dopamine you experienced prior. So dopamine drives you to go out and look for things. And then let's say you find a couple berries. These ones are rotten. These ones are good. Maybe you hunt an animal and kill it. You are going to achieve, or I should say experience, some sort of dopamine release. You found the reward. That's great. But then it needs to return to some lower level. Why? Well, because if you just stayed there, you would never continue to forage for more. It doesn't just increase your baseline and then stay there. It goes back down. And what's very important to understand is that it doesn't just go back down to the level it was before. It goes down to a level below what it was before you went out seeking that thing. Now, this is counterintuitive. Let's move this to modern day. I'm going to run this marathon. I'm going to train for this marathon. Then you run the marathon and you cross the finish line, you feel great, and you would think, okay, now I'm set for the entire year. I'm going to feel so much better. I'm going to feel this accomplishment in my body. It's going to be so great. But that's not what happens. You might feel some of those things, but your level of dopamine has actually dropped below baseline. Now, eventually it will ratchet back up. But two things are really important. First of all, the extent to which it drops below baseline is proportional to how high the peak was. So if you cross the finish line pretty happy, it won't drop that much below baseline afterward. If you cross the finish line ecstatic, well, a day or two later, you're going to feel quite a bit lower than you would otherwise. You might not be depressed because it depends on where that baseline was to begin with. But the so-called postpartum depression that people experience after giving birth or after some big win, a graduation or any kind of celebration, that postpartum drop in mood and affect and motivation is the drop in baseline dopamine. This is very important to understand because this happens on very rapid timescales and it can last quite a long time. It also explains the behavior that most of us are familiar with of engaging in something that we really enjoy, going to a restaurant that we absolutely love, or engaging in some way with some person that we really, really enjoy. But if we continue to engage in that behavior over and over again, it kind of loses its edge. It starts to kind of feel less exciting to us. Some of us experience that drop in excitement more quickly and more severely than others, but everyone experiences that to some extent. Some of you may be hearing this and think, no, that's not how it works for me. I'm just riding higher and higher all the time. I love my kids. I love my job. I love school. I love wins. I don't want losses. I agree. We all feel good when we are achieving things, but oftentimes we are feeling good because we are layering in different aspects of life, consuming things and doing things that increase our dopamine. We're getting those peaks. But afterward, the drop in baseline occurs, and it always takes a little while to get back to our stable baseline. We really all have a sort of dopamine set point. And if we continue to indulge in the same behaviors or even different behaviors that increase our dopamine in these big peaks over and over and over again, we won't experience the same level of joy from those behaviors or from anything at all. Now, that has a name. It's called addiction. But even for people who aren't addicted, even for people who don't have an attachment to any specific substance or behavior, this drop in below baseline after any peak in dopamine is substantial, and it governs whether or not we are going to feel motivated to continue to pursue other things. A few episodes ago, I talked about a friend who I've known a long time. This is actually the child of a friend who has basically become addicted to video games. He decided, actually after seeing that episode with Anna, to do a 30-day complete fast from phone, from video games, and from social media of all kinds. He's now at day 29. He's really accomplished this. Not incidentally, his levels of concentration, his overall mood are up. He's doing far, far better. What he did is hard. In particular, the first 14 days is really hard. But the way that you replenish the releasable pool of dopamine is to not engage in these dopaminergic seeking behaviors. Because remember, typically people arrive at a place where they want to stop engaging in these behaviors or ingesting substances when that dopamine is depleted, when they're not getting the same lift. In his case, he was feeling depressed. He thought he had ADHD. They were starting to treat it as ADHD. And certainly there are people out there who have ADHD, but what he found was that his levels of concentration are back. He does not need to be treated for ADHD. He's feeling good. He's exercising again. I'm not making this up. This is really a very specific but very relevant example of how the dopamine system can replenish itself. Things that can reduce your levels of baseline dopamine. One that is rarely discussed is melatonin. I have talked before on this podcast about melatonin, why I am not a fan of using melatonin in order to enhance sleep. It can help one get to sleep, but not stay asleep. Dr. Matt Walker, sleep expert from University of California, Berkeley, generally stated that the use of melatonin, except for treatment of jet lag, is generally not a good idea, and I agree. I've talked before about how viewing bright lights between the hours of 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. has been shown in studies by Dr. Samar Hattar, David Burson, excellent circadian scientists, to reduce levels of dopamine for several days after that light exposure. So dim the lights at night if you want to maintain healthy levels of dopamine.